So
for people.
next census in New Zealand, what to do?
Oh, I think you have to go back to paper forms. There will be people who want to do it online, but until you've got that right, you can't run the risk of not having that information because it's too important.
Agree, Peter?
Well, I think the first question, as I said, is to decide whether or not we actually need to do a next census, whether we aren't already capturing a lot of the information that the census would reveal. If the decision is yes, then I think there certainly should be the door-to-door or the mail option that there was previously.
And probably, Peter, given the extent of information we do have, what we do collect from people could be a lot briefer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because there's no doubt that your attention span will diminish, when you're filling out 12 pages of data. If you had maybe 3 or 4, then you'd probably get a better response rate.
Okay. Now, finally, on the show with Michelle Bogue, Peter Dunn, a wonderful item by Glenn McConnell about how a beach becomes nude drew our attention here. It points out there is no actual definition of what defines a nude beach and who designates it as such. Not the council, that's for sure. Now, there's been murmurs amongst Waiheke Islanders, for example, that nudity has become too popular and commonplace on the island, making it uncomfortable for beachgoers. Some Waiheke locals have complained of unexpectedly seeing naked swimmers and that they should stick to official nude beaches. But here's the rub. The idea that there are official nude beaches, let's say Little Palm Beach or St Leonard's Beach, is nothing but folklore. Paul Walden, Waiheke Local Board Chair, was quoted as saying. So I want to put it to the panel. For those who want to swim nude, Michelle Bogue, why don't we have designated beaches for nudity?
Well, I would disagree with Paul Walden because I lived on Waiheke for 10 years and everybody knew that people, if you went to Little Palm Beach, then you had to expect to see people in the nude. So if you didn't want to see nude people, you didn't go there, right? And if you're on Big Palm Beach and you sort of wandered over, then it was guaranteed that that is what you'd see.
There needs to be a sign.
So whether it was sanctioned or not, that was the home, that was where people who wanted to be nude, sunbathing, swimming or whatever, felt comfortable.
You're assuming a lot of information, I think.
Well, no, I don't think so. I think the Waiheke grapevine works really well.
Peter, what do you
I'm
reckon?
inclined to agree with Michelle. I think the grapevine is better than having a formal sign and designation, which is simply a point of advertisement to every weirdo that wants to come along and have a gawk. And as I understand it, the law at the moment says that being nude on a beach is not an offence unless the behaviour is offensive. So people sunbathing, swimming, minding their own business with no clothes on, I don't have a problem with. It's when they become objectionable, I guess, that the law takes its course, but that's the situation at present. So I'd just leave that sleeping dog to lie.
Well, would you be put off or distracted if you had to share a beach with clothing optional only folk?
It would depend, well, two things. Firstly, if I went to a beach knowing from the local gossip that that's what I was going to find, then I couldn't expect to be put off. If I didn't expect it and sort of observed it next door, it would really depend on the behaviour of the people. If they were minding their own business and doing nothing that was sort of outlandish, then, none of my business.
So I wouldn't choose to expose myself to that.
It's not your thing?
I find it prurient. I don't enjoy being put in that situation.
Yeah. So no nudity for around the paddle. I kind of agree too, eh? Togs on all the way. Michelle Bogue and Peter Dunn. Fantastic. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Emil. And I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, at least half a dozen people are believed to be injured in a stabbing attack in Sydney's CBD. The government's top statistician bows out after the numbers for the 2018 census just don't add up. We talked to Minister James Shaw live about the damning review of the census debacle. The weather bomb that demoed boats and sent a car ferry careering towards an Auckland wharf. Employers pitched to a captive audience, literally at a job expo behind the wire at Auckland Women's Prison. All Black Scott Barrett's suspension means he's out for the Bledisloe Cup, but don't panic, he's back for the World Cup. You can check us out on Facebook and Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. The fallout from the botched 2018 census has politicians and Stats NZ going into damage control. The release of an independent report on the census has already claimed one casualty. Stats NZ's Chief Executive Liz McPherson announced her resignation today. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
The report highlighted problems of the department's governance and leadership and the way the transition to an online census was handled. Ms McPherson says steps have already been taken to address what went wrong, and she is taking full responsibility. But National Spokesperson for Statistics, Zhen Yang, says she is a scapegoat for Statistics Minister James Shaw, whose failure to show leadership played a significant part in the mess. However, Mr Shaw says he was one of 6 ministers involved in the census, and the review is clear that there was nothing any of them could have done differently. From Parliament, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
The Chief Censor says a review has backed his decision to ban a statement published before the Christchurch mosque attacks. David Shanks says the Film and Literature Board of Review has confirmed that the document, titled The Great Replacement, is objectionable.
This is a document that is intrinsically bound up with and relates to the most horrific event of mass murder we have ever seen in this country. This document promoted, encouraged and justified acts of murder and terrorist violence.
The Chief Censor, David Shanks. Reports are coming in of several people being randomly stabbed by a man in central Sydney Street. Eyewitnesses say the man was tackled to the ground by members of the public and then taken away by the police. It's not yet known exactly how many people have been injured or how badly. One witness has told the ABC a man came running around the corner with a long knife, chased by several other men armed with crowbars. Several people were hurt when a school bus collided with a van in Auckland's Queen Street at about 2:30 this afternoon. St John says some were treated for minor injuries and no one needed to go to hospital. The street was partly blocked but has since been reopened. Fire and Emergency has confirmed that one of the country's biggest forest fires was accidentally caused. The Pigeon Valley Fire in the Tasman district was started on February the 5th by sparks from machinery in a dry paddock. Over the next couple of weeks, it burned through more than 2,000 hectares of commercial plantation forest, property and pastures. The Principal Rural Fire Officer for Nelson Tasman, Ian Reid, says it was fuelled by strong wind and rotted tree stumps.
Much of the forest area where the fire passed through is second and third rotation. Although that doesn't necessarily generate a lot of extra material above the ground, it can leave quite a bit of material in the ground in the form of stumps.
Ian Reid of Fire and Emergency. A boatie at Westhaven Marina in Auckland says the squall that hit the city's harbour last night was unlike anything she's experienced. Annette Woodyear-Smith says the terrible weather, which onlookers have described as a tornado, struck suddenly and without warning. She says she's been on the boat during a squall in the harbour in the past, but last night was something else.
Nothing like this. It's just been in the eye of the storm, this little cyclone, and just lifted the boat up and lifted it out of the water.
Annette Woodyear-Smith says the stern of her boat was lifted up, damaged the frame, and a lot of material has gone to the bottom of the harbour. 2 new air ambulance helicopters for the South Island have been unveiled in Christchurch by the Health Minister David Clark. The Airbus H145s are due to start service tomorrow, one based in Christchurch and the other in Dunedin. It's the first time such aircraft have been used in New Zealand for emergency medicine purposes. The new Plymouth District Council has broken with convention and voted to pay $50,000 a year for the upkeep of 43 urupa. It has heeded a submission by Te Atiawa Kaumātua Peter Moeahu, who says many urupa were established where they are because of land confiscations and because Maori were excluded from public cemeteries. Mr Moeahu says the vote is the culmination of a 10-year struggle, and he applauds the council for looking beyond the Burials and Cremations Act.
My view is that Section 3 of the Act is racist in its intent because it specifically excludes Maori from council resources.
A council report notes the council has no legal obligation to fund urupa upkeep, but it is the right thing to do. A further 30 urupa on private land are excluded from funding. It's 5:05. The All Blacks lock Scott Barrett has escaped with a one-test ban, but assistant coach Ian Foster doesn't view the penalty as a best-case scenario. Barrett will miss this week's Bledisloe Cup decider after pleading guilty to a dangerous tackle on Wallabies captain Michael Hooper last weekend, which led to his being sent off. He has been suspended until September the 1st, which means he will be able to play the side's next test against Tonga and won't miss the opening World Cup match against South Africa. If the All Blacks were relieved at the decision, Foster wasn't showing it.
Well, I don't think there's ever a best case scenario when a player gets suspended, because it impacts on his own preparation time, and he's already had quite a bit of time off. So we try to take a pretty matter-of-fact approach to those things, and I guess it's still disappointing for Scott, but it's just means we've got a bit of work to do there.
Ian Foster. The country's top women's cricketers can now earn up to $80,000 a year under a newly negotiated player agreement with New Zealand Cricket. The minimum retainer will be a $44,000 scaled up to $64,000, with up to $16,000 available in match fees. Previously, the most a white fern could earn was $48,000. There are also pay rises for domestic players. Skiers Alice Robertson and Willis Feasey have doubled up at the National Ski Champs in Queenstown, adding the women's and men's national slalom titles to go with the giant slalom titles they won earlier this week. That's the news.
Police invite the gun lobby to a buyback.
I'm going to speak to gun owners. I'm going to Waikato on Thursday. Cofco can join me. Come along with me and we will speak to the people who are surrendering firearms.
Fonterra faces the music.
Too much debt for far too long. They've been a wind-up payout co-op, and that's coming back and biting them.
And Shane Jones is not impressed.
I've got zero sorrow or sympathy for the characters on that board. They swanned around as if their dung didn't smell. Well, it stinks to high heaven today.
You heard it here first. Morning Reports with Corin Dan and Susie Ferguson. Weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, the full extent of the botched 2018 census. Where to from here? And after 10, award-winning Christchurch-based volcanologist Ben Kennedy on his love of volcanoes and exciting experiments. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Occasional showers, some heavy with possible squally thunderstorms in the west this evening. Showers clearing Bay of Plenty later tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairatapa and Manawatu through to Wellington. Fine tonight. Cloudy periods with a few showers tomorrow, clearing in the south tomorrow afternoon. For Marlborough and Nelson, fine apart from isolated showers tomorrow afternoon and evening. Bulla and Westland, occasional showers clearing from the south tomorrow. Canterbury mostly fine, cloud developing this evening with showers about Banks Peninsula, becoming fine later tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods and a few showers. Snow flurries possible to 200 metres tonight and tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain tonight and in the morning. Southwesterlies rising to gale tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:08.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. As you may have heard in the news, at least one person has been taken to hospital after a man went on a stabbing spree in Sydney's CBD. There's video online of police forcefully leading a man away from the scene near King and Clarence Streets. Another video shows members of the public restraining the man with cafe chairs and a milk crate after he ran through the streets, climbing onto moving cars, calling for people to shoot him. In the video, the restrained man on the ground has blood on his hands and clothes. Witnesses say the man was running with a 30-centimetre knife and stabbed a woman. They say he looked to be in his 20s and could have been affected by drugs. Now, police say the operation is ongoing and will bring you more on this story later in the programme. But back home now, we let ourselves and New Zealand down. And with that, the government's top statistician threw in the towel today following the botched 2018 census. Her resignation came as the census failings were laid bare in a report, with full or partial responses collected for only 90% of the estimated population, 4% less than the 2013 census. In the case of Maori, the response rate dived to 68%, compared with 88% at the last census. Here's our political reporter Joe Moyer.
The Statistics Minister James Shaw summed up Census 2018 in 5 simple words.
Well, it could have gone better.
That sentiment was echoed by Chief Statistician Liz McPherson, the State Services Commissioner Peter Hughes, and the two authors of the independent review of the census released today. Ms McPherson says she wasn't pressured into resigning and accepts the buck stops with her.
I want to publicly apologise for what went wrong in the 2018 census. I am truly sorry. As Chief Executive, I am ultimately accountable for the performance of the organisation, and I take this accountability very seriously.
In April, the Chief Statistician wrote to MPs after being threatened with being held in contempt of Parliament to confirm almost 1 in 7 people did not complete the census. Today, the report painted a picture of shortfalls and failures at just about every level, many of which the public weren't told about.
One of the things that we have learnt from this exercise is the critical importance of being transparent, even when actually the only thing that we can say is we're still working on it.
An overwhelming mistake was too much emphasis on having an online census and not having contingency plans for when things started to go wrong. Ms McPherson accepted there were not nearly enough boots on the ground to help deliver a paper-based census and a general underestimation of how many people would rely on filling out the census that way. She also apologised to Maori and Pacifica.
As many of you know, the response rates for the 2018 census, particularly for Maori and Pacifica, were unacceptably low. That meant significant data gaps far beyond what we've ever experienced before. These gaps put the delivery of the 2018 census results at serious risk.
Ms McPherson will stay on in the role until Christmas at the request of State Services Commissioner Peter Hughes, who says she's the best person to finish the remediation work. Mr Hughes says things will always go wrong for chief executives and he can't expect perfection, but Ms McPherson has handled her mistakes with integrity.
When things go wrong, my expectations are very clear. I expect public service chief executives to own it, fix it, learn from it, and to stand up and be accountable. And that's exactly what Ms McPherson is doing here, and I can't ask any more of her than that.
The National Party says the botched data has massive implications for the next election, and Māori were at risk of losing an electorate seat. But Ms McPherson insists the data needed for electoral boundaries has been collected. This is because while the response rate was lower than the 2013 census, the coverage rate was better. There have been calls for the 2023 census to be brought forward to 2021, but the report doesn't recommend that, saying it would be unsafe to do so with so little time to prepare. The first official results of the 2018 census will now be released on the 23rd of September, 11 months later than planned. And in the meantime, a new statistics boss has to be found. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jo Moyer.
Statistics Minister James Shaw says while the review has found failings, they are being fixed, and he's in our Wellington studio and joins us now. Good evening, Minister. I just want to be clear. The statistics boss, Liz McPherson, is going. Was it made clear to her that that was the expectation, that she should go?
Look, it is Liz's decision, and as Peter Hughes said, his expectation is that his chief executives own their mistakes and that they fix them and that they learn from them, but also that they take accountability for them, and I support that decision.
So let me put it another way. If she hadn't resigned, was she going to be sacked?
Look, that's a hypothetical question. Liz takes her responsibilities extremely strongly, and I know that this has been weighing on her for some time.
Talking about responsibilities, I know that several statistics ministers were involved with this particular census, but as the current minister, what responsibility do you take for what is a debacle?
Well, I see my responsibility as fixing it, and the work that Liz has led in remediating the census over the course of the last 12 months I think has been outstanding. Connie Graziadei, who was one of the two reviewers who spoke at the press conference this morning, pointed out that the work that Statistics NZ has done in remediation is so good that it not only will it serve future New Zealand censuses, but actually will be of use to other statistics agencies around the world.
Yeah, and that's great. But did you ask the right questions during this process? Did you go seek clarification? Did you dig deep enough to find out what exactly was going on and how bad it was?
When they started the independent review, I sat down with Murray Jack and Connie Graziadei, and I specifically asked them to look at my role and the role of other statistics ministers, of which there have been 6 in total over the course of the census period, and to say, were there things that we could have or should have done differently? What they have told me is that in their view there wasn't, essentially because ministers are only as good as the information that they are provided with. And I guess one of the key findings was that big variances to the plan and key risks were not being escalated when they should have been.
Yes, but it comes back to that question. Did you go back and seek more information? If you're only as good as the information you're getting, were you probing enough for that information?
Well, I mean, that is essentially what the question that I put to the independent reviewers, and in their sense, the answer is no. I think the questions that I was asking, I was being provided with information both about the online side and also the offline component, the paper-based census, and was being assured that things were going according to plan.
So were you misled?
In the days,
Minister? Intentionally or otherwise, were you misled?
I think that the information that I was receiving, the report says that ministers were not wholly apprised of the facts on the ground.
So does that mean you were misled?
Look, that's strong language. Certainly there were big variances and risks that were decisions around key risks that we were not being apprised of. And I guess one of the things that I saw in the report that I found really disappointing was that what got tested in advance of the census, and the tests did go very well, was not actually what happened on the ground. And essentially we didn't know that what was being delivered was not what had been tested or planned for. And that's what I mean about big variances to the plan. Those decisions do not appear to have been escalated in the way that they should have been.
All right, so we now find ourselves in this situation. So how much of the data is compromised, and where are the gaps and inadequacies still? Specifically.
Well, and this is really important because New Zealanders need to have confidence in the census and in the agency that produces the census. And as Joe Moyer's report just said, there is a difference between the input into the census, which was the response rate, which was unacceptably low, and the coverage rate, which is the output of the census. So the reason why the census output has been delayed is because Stats have been working over the course of the last year to supplement the input with information that the government already holds.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Minister, but I do get that. So you have patched the gaps for core information using other available information. And so you're saying that that is above the gold standard, the information that you've managed to get a hold of. But there is still other data which falls short. And that's what I'm interested in. Where are the gaps still, and what are the consequences of those gaps?
Yeah, so the example that Stats NZ released earlier this year was iwi affiliation data, and that is not as good as they would like. So they have Maori ethnicity and descent, but they don't have iwi affiliation.
And so what does that mean in practical terms?
Well, they're working through that with key users of that data, and you made the point that there's a kind of a gold standard that they use for national statistics. That actually doesn't mean that something that doesn't reach that gold standard isn't usable, but you just have to be very careful about how you use it. So what they're going to be doing in September, and then the second release is in December, and then another release early next year, is tranches of releases, and when they do that, they'll say what has met that gold standard, and if something hasn't met that gold standard, they're still going to be publishing their methodology and saying what it can be used for and what it can't be used for.
So that iwi affiliations information, for example, could it compromise treaty settlements? Could it disadvantage hapu who are wanting to go on their own with treaty settlements? What are the practical ramifications?
So those are possibilities, but one of the other things that Stats has been doing is it doesn't just release those statistics, it's actually working with iwi Māori organisations on what their data needs are, and they've been working with them on ways to remediate that, and also to say, well, what you can use that information for. That seems to be going reasonably well so far.
How many other holes are there? How many other areas fall short?
I can't tell you that because
How come we don't know that? More than a year on, we still can't identify the exact failings.
because the work on some of those data sets isn't yet complete. Like I said, there's going to be 3 tranches of release, one in September, one in December, then another one early next year. And that rolling set of releases, not all of the work has yet been completed to release them.
Before you go, Minister, if you could very quickly, off the top of your head, complete this sentence for me. Census 2018 was?
A mixed bag.
Thank you for joining us. That is Statistics Minister James Shaw. It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We are keen for your feedback. What do you make of that? The top statistician in the country has resigned from her position today after that report into what can only be described as a botched census. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And in breaking news, a rescue operation is underway for 5 climbers hit by an avalanche on Mount Cook. The police say one person has moderate injuries, believed to be a dislocated shoulder. Inspector Dave Gaskin says the group set off a locator beacon which alerted emergency services in Wellington this afternoon. He says he understands other members of the group also have minor injuries. Boats lie submerged in the water and broken glass litters the ground in places after another stormy night on Auckland's waterfront. Almost 50 boats were damaged or broke their moorings in last night's storm, including a super yacht and the Great Barrier Island ferry. Full containers were blown over, some into the harbour, and boaties were left cleaning up their damaged vessels. Tom Ferry and Nick Monroe filed this report.
From the port all the way to West Haven Marina, the destruction of last night's storm is easy to see. Plastic furniture, containers and debris float in the sea, and boaties were out checking on their pride and joy. Bob Still was drinking rum on his boat last night when it struck.
Last night there was some thunder and I thought, I wonder, and then it started to rain and it was just a bit gentler and I thought, oh no, that's all right. And then next minute it was just this major whoosh of wind again. That strong that you knew that if it kept going, things were just going to fly to pieces.
His boat escaped unscathed, and after the storm ripped through, he was out helping fire and emergency access boats that were damaged.
I mean, I've been sailing for 50-something years, and I've never felt wind like that. And so I pulled the washboards out so I had an escape route and looked out the back of the boat, and it's just like mayhem, you know.
50 metres down the wharf, Roger Henstock's mast lies across the walkway. A power box is down and the neighbouring yacht is totally submerged.
And I've been told the boat actually rose up out of the water, landed on our forward cabin, and one guy took a photograph of it and it slid back onto the midships there. Did some more damage all the way down, knocked out 3 windows and did some woodwork damage, and then slid back into its berth area and sank. Yeah, so a sad day for all of us.
He hasn't seen the owner of the neighbouring boat, but lots of people were stopping by to take photos.
It's obviously gone up onto our boat, slid along the length of our boat, and gone back into the water, taking this out as it goes. And obviously there's a hole in the hull somewhere.
Divers and salvage teams were fishing out cars, containers and boats from the water. A huge 50-foot catamaran was totally flipped, floating upside down by the marina. Nick Lewis is in charge of salvage company Marina Services Auckland and was kept busy last night and through today.
We would not long finish the job and we're on our way home actually, and we just heard this big roar. And one of the fishermen across on the viaduct there, one of his vehicles had actually ended up in the water and sunk on the seabed, and there was a vehicle hanging over the edge with the front wheels hanging over the side.
Some of his crew jumped on board the Great Barrier Island ferry after it came free from its moorings.
Created quite a bit of carnage, lifting the 50-foot cat out of the water from one side of the marina to the other.
A metal and glass balcony was smashed and bent totally horizontal at the Hilton Hotel. On Prince's Wharf, the Mayor Phil Goff was shown around the Shed 10 venue, which lost many of its doors and had its skylights smashed in.
This building is over 100 years old, and nobody here has an institutional memory of damage being inflicted on this building in the way that it has been in the last 24 hours. You can see those heavy doors that have just been thrown off their rollers, some of them actually into the harbour, so we're going to have to retrieve those. You can see from the force of the weather and the heavy material that's been thrown around, if that had occurred at a time when this building was occupied, you can imagine the injuries that might have been sustained.
He says the cost of repairing damage to the Cloud and Shed 10 is yet to be worked through, but he expects it'll be hundreds of thousands of dollars. For Checkpoint, Tom Ferry.
Back to Sydney now, where police say they have responded to reports of a stabbing in the CBD. Reports on social media suggest a man tried to randomly stab people. A graphic video was shared of the man running through the streets with a knife, shouting Allahu Akbar and asking people to shoot him. The video shows people restraining the man with their cafe chairs and a milk crate. One person has been taken to hospital in a stable condition, and eyewitness David Val says he saw the man was running through the CBD armed with a knife and covered in blood.
I was walking towards Wynyard Park and this man came running around the corner from about 3 or 4 metres away from me, and then came about 5 or 6 other men chasing him. They were armed with crowbars, and one man had an axe, and another man who was a fireman, I think, had some firefighting implement. And also then a man with a news camera up on his shoulder. And so my immediate impression was that it was a scene from a crime show being shot. And but then that quickly turned out not to be the case, and the man ran down the road towards a cafe where some patrons there must have tripped him up, and they then put a chair on top of him, a milk crate over his head. The other men who were chasing him at this time then restrained him, and I then saw a long knife that he must have dropped when he'd been tripped up. And obviously, all the people there were quite anxious, and but the man was then under restraint, and they then put the man in handcuffs and brought him under control, and then put him into the back of a paddy wagon. But it looked like there was a couple of security guards, clearly just people who must have seen this fellow stabbing people, as I understand it, in other streets, and given chase and just grabbed whatever they could to try to catch him. He was, I would have said, dark, bushy, unkempt hair, about 25 years old. He was wearing jeans and was poorly dressed. He had no shoes. He looked to me like a man who was in some distress, and he looked like someone who was mad.
David Val, who witnessed this afternoon's stabbing in Sydney. The police have said that members of the public who chased the man and restrained him are heroes. All Black Scott Barrett's red card hearing has resulted in the lock copping a suspension that rules him out for this weekend's Bledisloe Cup decider against the Wallabies at Eden Park. The Foul Play Review Committee accepted Barrett's guilty plea today, and based on the fact he's never faced the committee before, was stood down for 3 weeks. It's a short-term sacrifice that will see him available for the Rugby World Cup in 6 weeks' time. The All Blacks fronted the media today, saying their sole focus for the moment is not letting the Wallabies pry the Bledisloe Cup from their grip come Saturday. Sports reporter Ravinda Hunia has the story.
All Black Scott Barrett has dodged a bullet, receiving a paltry 3-week ban for a dangerous tackle on Wallabies captain Michael Hooper. But according to his teammates, it could be an eternity the way he's taken it. The stand down means Barrett won't feature in this weekend's Bledisloe Cup blockbuster at Eden Park. Returning midfielder Sonny Bill Williams, who copped a red card send-off 2 years ago, says he knows exactly how Barrett feels.
I know he's not that type of player, nor am I, guys. Thank you. You feel for him because of course, that knowing the type of individual that he is, he would have felt like he let the whole team down. Collectively, we've spoken about that and just trying to put that behind us and move forward, and that's what we're trying to do this week.
It's a sentiment echoed by assistant coach Ian Foster. Barrett is only the fourth All Black to be sent off in a test, and Foster wants this week's focus quickly redirected.
Just the consistency and then doing the best they can, and at the moment, that's all you can ask for. I'm just focusing on this week. There's no point in us highlighting anything else. We've been found guilty of something, and we'll just take our medicine on that. And something that we don't like, and we've got to look at what we can control.
And Foster's way of controlling the focus of reporters was to lift pressure from the playing group and admit the coaches should also be shouldering blame for last week's loss.
We've just got to do what we expect our players to do, which is to evaluate how we prepared off the park, how we prepared tactically, and did we get everything right. And when you get a performance like that, you can't hand on heart say as a coach that you did get everything right. We were part of Saturday night, and we've got to be making sure we're part of the solution. You do a lot of soul searching in this job anyway. To be fair, you go a little bit deeper when you come off a poor performance.
While many have shown their support for Barrett with calls of inconsistent refereeing in World Rugby, veteran Sam Whitelock has some simple advice for the do-or-die match this weekend.
The biggest thing is we've got to be really disciplined in how we're playing. We want to play hard, but also got to play fair, and there's 1,000 different cameras and different angles. Things that you probably got away with in the past is something that's not going to happen now, so making sure that we still bring that physical edge, but we do it within the letter of the law.
The Wallabies haven't won at Eden Park since 1986, and they'll know exactly who is taking the field, including Scott Barrett's replacement on Thursday morning. Mo te hōtaka o te ahipo nei, ko Ravinda Hunia tēnei.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, allegations of intimidation are emerging during a winter grazing stoush in Southland. Employers pitch to a captive audience at a job expo at Auckland Women's Prison, and the Wellington suburbs saying, oh no, to Bodolo. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program today. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or do send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for Susanna in the headlines at 5:32.
The fallout from the botched 2018 census has politicians and Stats NZ going into damage control. An independent report has highlighted problems with the department's leadership and how the transition to an online census was handled. Stats NZ's chief executive Liz McPherson has resigned, saying she is taking full responsibility. But the National Party says she is a scapegoat for the Statistics Minister James Shaw, whose failure to show leadership played a significant part in the mess. A man said to be armed with a long knife has been arrested in central Sydney after being restrained by members of the public. A witness says the man was running through the area, chased by several other men armed with crowbars. Passers-by used chairs and a milk crate to restrain the offender until police arrived. One woman was injured. A rescue operation is underway for 5 climbers hit by an avalanche on Mount Cook in the Southern Alps. The police say one person has moderate injuries believed to be a dislocated shoulder, and others have minor injuries. They say the group set off a locator beacon which alerted emergency services. The police have finished a reenactment at the scene of a fatal hit-and-run in Christchurch last Wednesday. A homeless man, Dean Amies, was hit by a van fleeing police in New Brighton. The police are still looking for 21-year-old Liam Strickland in relation to the accident. Fire and Emergency has confirmed the massive forest fire in the Tasman district in February was accidentally caused, started by sparks from machinery in a dry paddock. Over the next couple of weeks, the Pigeon Valley fire burned through more than 2,000 hectares of commercial plantation forest, property and pastures. The region's principal rural fire officer says the fire was fuelled by strong wind and rotted tree stumps. Several people were hurt when a school bus collided with a van in Auckland's Queen Street this afternoon. St John says some were treated for minor injuries and no one needed to go to hospital. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National, and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get down to business news now with Madison Reedy. Hi, Madison.
Hello.
PGG Wrightson, so their full year results out today. How did they do?
Yeah, so PGG Wrightson is the country's largest rural services company. It sells everything from gumboots to fertiliser. Take your pick if you need some. So the headline number for their full financial year did actually look pretty good. It made a net profit of $132 million.
Didn't they sell something this year, though?
Yeah, they did. So actually the operating profit, really the reason that they had such a record profit this year was because of a gain on the sale of their seeds and grain mainstay business to a Danish firm called DLF Seeds for $134 million. So really the underlying number for their operating profit, it was actually down by about nearly a third to $24 million, so not so good under the hood there. Now the company says that it's struggling because farmers are doing it tough at the moment with the likes of the Mycoplasma bovis disease and also tougher lending restrictions on farmers too. It means that they're not spending as much, so they're not buying from companies like PGG Wrightson, and they're feeling the wrath there too. Now, because of that, the outlook for PGG did look pretty grim. Its chairman, Roger Finlay, says that the impact of M. bovis on dairy and beef and uncertainty regarding regulatory change affecting agriculture is impacting confidence levels in the rural sector, and we're seeing a more cautious approach to investment and expenditure from our customers. So that pretty much sums it up for PGG there.
And then throw Fonterra in on top of that.
Absolutely.
Housing data. I see what you've done here. A spring in the step of housing data.
So we're still in winter, but the housing market is moving on forward throughout the seasons of the year, and it does have a bit of a spring in its step according to the Real Estate Institute's latest house price index. That rose 1.5% for the year to July after a bit of an uptick, just about 0.02% of a lift in the month of July. Now that's taken the national median house price to $575,000. That's a lift of $25,000 there, although prices were flat in Auckland. But house sales have been rising. They actually saw a rise in the month of July for the first time since November last year. So in about 8 months, we haven't seen a rise in the volume of property sales. Nationwide, the number of properties sold rose 2.5%, but in Auckland alone, they were actually up 6.6%. Now, that is encouraging economists to think that there is now a spring in the step of the housing market and that it's finally on its way up after being quite soggy and sour recently. And obviously with interest rates at historic lows at the moment, that is supposedly going to push more people into the housing market and make people get more mortgages and buy more homes. Now, talking about mortgages, the Reserve Bank has actually been doing some statistics behind the scenes on how large people's mortgages actually are. Now, their figures show that a third of mortgages to first home buyers are 5 times or more that of their income. Just let that sink in for a moment. That's pretty big. But the Reserve Bank says that they're not actually all that worried about this. In fact, this is actually eased off, so they're less so worried about it. They obviously have tools like the loan-to-value ratio restrictions, which basically keeps banks lending to risky first home buyers in check. They say that they will look to ease LVRs. We've told you about that before, but they obviously and they've been on record saying that they do want to keep LVRs as a tool in their kit to ensure that this debt-to-income ratio doesn't swell any larger.
Let's do a quick whip around the markets too.
The NZX Top 50 Index closed down just 0.17% tonight. That's a fall of just 18 points to close at 10,854. The New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 64.5 US cents, 95.4 to the Australian and 53.4 to the British pence.
Thanks, Maddie. That's Madison Reedy with our business update. Let's head offshore now. Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, says ongoing violent protests are pushing the territory down what she describes as a path of no return. Thousands of passengers remain stranded at Hong Kong airport, with all flights cancelled in and out of the region following another massive pro-democracy protest. Airlines at Hong Kong airport are now trying to clear the backlog, but the closure of a major hub has sparked air travel chaos across the region, and there are threats of more protests to come. The BBC's Bill Hayton has the latest.
Hong Kong airport is now functioning, though things are still far from normal. The protesters have gone, but dozens of flights are still being cancelled, mainly by the territory's flag carrier, Cathay Pacific, and the disruption looks likely to continue for a while. The storm clouds are still hanging over Hong Kong, particularly over the head of its chief executive. She looked tense at her weekly press conference and offered nothing new. She refused to answer a question about whether she had the authority to withdraw the controversial extradition law, which was the original spark for the protests.
This question has been answered on previous occasions.
But you've evaded the question.
Number one,
numerous
as we have all heard from the spokesman of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, the central government is still confident that I myself, as the government of the Hong Kong SAR, together with the police force, that we are still capable of resolving this crisis.
Meanwhile, the central government is increasing the psychological pressure. Official media has released video of units of paramilitary police travelling to Shenzhen, just over the border from Hong Kong. It appears to be a warning that Beijing is willing to use even more force to quell the protests. The demonstrations are now in their 10th week and show no sign of fading. Instead, the authorities' response seems to be adding more fuel to the fire. Neither side is backing down nor reaching out for compromise.
And that was Bill Hayton in Hong Kong. Let's return to Sydney now, where a woman has been taken to hospital after a man wielding a knife went on a stabbing spree in the CBD. The man has been arrested by police after members of the public chased the man and held him down with chairs and a milk crate. Witnesses say he stabbed a woman in the back and tried to stab others. And police say it is serious and they have set up multiple crime scenes. Superintendent Gavin Wood says the members of the public were significantly brave and are heroes. Now, Sydney man Mark Keane was there and is on the line now. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. What could you see and where were you when this all started to unfold?
So I was just like literally on the same corner, grabbing a coffee, just minding my own business as I normally do, and just on the phone with somebody else at work, literally minutes before. And this is just where they were running down with the guy. And then I sort of took off my coffee and went round the corner, and literally like a couple of seconds later, this all unfolded directly behind me.
So what could you see?
Well, the guy was a whole bunch of screaming for a start, and then the guy was tripped over by the members of the public. I think they were undercover cops, and then a whole bunch of fireys that were there as well. And they had axes and a whole bunch of other things. And at first, I didn't think it was real. Like, I thought it was just like, what is this? It took a while to process it because I was on the phone as well at the same time. And then all of a sudden I just had to pause the conversation and just really take it in, what I was seeing literally meters away. And this guy was like screaming, and they pinned him down, as you said, with a crate and with a chair and everything else. And then a couple of minutes later, the cops turned up.
So those members of the public, can you describe to me, I mean, how many people were there and how did they exactly bring him to the ground?
There was about probably 2 members of the public, whether or not they were plainclothes officers or whatever they were, but there were a couple of members of the public, and then there was about 3 different fireys there. You probably saw in the footage, and they basically just had axes and a whole bunch of other things, but they tripped him up because they were running down a hill, and they tripped him up. He sort of fell down, and they sort of just dived on top of him altogether, and sort of grabbed him.
And
the opportunity, I think, just the gutter and the hill.
So when you're on the phone, when do you first realise something is going on? Could you hear this man? What was he saying or doing?
Couldn't really hear exactly what he said, but it was just like people were screaming at him, and then you can't really say it now, but it's the C word and a whole bunch of other things, which I think if you go online, there's a whole bunch of videos going around, the colourful language that was spoken. But one of the main guys with the short blonde hair, one of the guys that pinned him down, was going sort of right off at him. He was fully worked up, high on adrenaline. But that was pretty much the language that was after the fact. But at the time, it was just more of a screaming thing, and I couldn't really sort of make sense of what they were saying. People were just yelling and screaming. whole bunch of people. And then literally minutes later, like the members of the public just sort of came up all around. There was what's going on? Everyone was sort of walking up to get a glimpse as to what was happening.
There are reports that the man was asking people to shoot him. Did you hear that at any point?
No, that was up further on York Street. I think he was saying that shoot me, and I think I want to die and all this sort of stuff, apparently. But no, that was further up. I just saw the end of it.
Could you see if he was armed?
I couldn't, no, but that's the other thing. Apparently people were saying that he was stabbing people on York Street, because I then, like at the time when I was watching it, I didn't actually know what was going on. Like the amount of force that they were using, like I thought, okay, this guy must have done something really, really bad. Like at first I thought it was like a pub fight gone wrong, too much alcohol, but then the amount of force they were using on this guy was, I've never seen anything like it in my life. So I knew it must have been bad. I couldn't comprehend exactly what. But it wasn't until I found out sort of later on that when I asked one of the guys, I said, what's going on? He goes, apparently he was stabbing people in York Street. I thought, holy moly. I mean, I'm lucky to be alive myself.
And now that you've had a bit of time to think about it, what's going through your head?
At the moment, I'm just sitting in front of my computer in the office. There's a whole bunch of messages coming through on Twitter and social media.
Bit shell-shocked?
Well, yeah, shocked, and got a messages through from work just to check if everything's okay.
Yeah, I really do appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much. That is Sydney man Mark Keane, who was on the street at the time this man was chased down by the public. We know that a woman has been taken to hospital after he apparently went on a stabbing spree. And as described there by Mark, members of the public and he believes firefighters tackled him to the ground, and the police have set up several crime scenes in the area. We'll bring you more details as we have them. To the US now, where the US Attorney General William Barr has criticised authorities at a New York prison after the apparent suicide of the financier Jeffrey Epstein, and has promised investigations into the billionaire will continue. Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Centre at the weekend. He was arrested early last month and pleaded not guilty to charges of sex trafficking involving dozens of underage girls. From New York, CNN's Dina Jones reports.
Investigations announced after accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein died from an apparent suicide over the weekend at Manhattan's Metropolitan Correctional Center.
I was appalled, and indeed the whole department was, and frankly, angry to learn of the MCC's failure to adequately secure this prisoner.
U.S. Attorney General William Barr blasting the federal jail for what he called serious irregularities that are deeply concerning.
We'll get to the bottom.
Barr promising the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice Inspector General would get to the bottom of what happened. Multi-millionaire financier was found unresponsive in his cell early Saturday morning and later pronounced dead at a local hospital. The New York medical examiner conducted an autopsy Sunday, but has not determined the cause of death, pending further information. According to protocol for the special housing unit where he was kept, guards are supposed to check on inmates every 30 minutes. But a source tells CNN Epstein's cell was not regularly monitored the night before he was found dead.
Was this a matter of incompetence, indifference, or was it something more nefarious?
Epstein's apparent suicide comes less than 24 hours after over 1,000 pages of documents containing more disturbing sex trafficking allegations against Epstein were unsealed in a related lawsuit one of his alleged victims filed against one of his associates. As for Epstein's accusers, now robbed of a chance to face him in a court of law, Barr insists this is not over.
But let me assure you that this case will continue on against anyone who was complicit with Epstein. Any co-conspirators should not rest easy. The victims deserve justice, and they will get it.
US Attorney General William Barr ending that report. And earlier, French officials said the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein had found connections with France. Epstein is reported to have kept a luxury apartment in central Paris. Back home now, and allegations of intimidation are emerging during a winter grazing stoush in Southland. Winter grazing is when livestock are kept in small sections of pasture until they completely finish off the crop. At times, the animals are left wallowing in mud and in cramped conditions. Tess Brunton reports.
Environmental activist Jeff Reid wants winter grazing to end, saying runoff into waterways is only one part of the problem.
You don't have to drive far in Southland to see cows in mud and cows drinking their own effluent. It really is horrifying. It's very, very destructive to soil, but it also is harming our nation's farming community because there's a lot of farmers in this country that don't use this style of intensive agriculture, and this practice is dragging them down.
He and another activist went to take photos of winter grazing conditions near Mossburn over the weekend and says they were not welcome guests.
We have had our vehicle rammed, we've had a rock thrown through the window, we've had our road blocked and our property blocked, we've had farmers intimidate us away from the place where we're staying.
Southland dairy farmer Alan Baird says there has been no intention to intimidate any environmentalists. On Sunday afternoon, Mr. Baird and up to 15 other farmers set up a barbecue in a paddock near to where the activists were. But he says it was to keep an eye on what they were doing near their properties, not to intimidate them.
The barbecue was going, we had some sausages. At the end of the day, a couple of beers were opened, and by no means was there any intimidation or an attempt to intimidate them. They stayed in the nursery, and we happily talked amongst ourselves.
The police say there's been reports of people photographing stock and a report of a rock thrown at a vehicle window in Mossburn over the weekend, but no charges have been laid. Southland Regional Council Chair Nicole Horrell flew over part of the region last week to see winter grazing practices from the air.
We were quite disappointed that we're not seeing a great uptake of some of the best practice for how you actually graze the stock. And some good practice too, but I guess and just the scale of winter grazing in places is causing a few issues.
Some are concerned that when too many animals are kept together in a small space in bad weather, heavy rain can cause runoff to flow across paddocks and enter waterways. Nicole Horrell wants to see an end to the adversarial commentary from both sides, saying collaboration is the best step forward, as there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
It'll take time to transition people out of that, but winter grazing per se is not that bad. If it's done properly, it's actually quite effective. To have no winter grazing would mean a huge drop in stock numbers. We would probably bankrupt half the farmers in Southland and destroy the economy. And I don't think anybody wants that either, so we just need to work on innovative solutions.
Mr Horrell says the council's proposed water and land plan will set a strict standard for dairy intensification and intensive winter grazing, but it's in front of the Environment Court. Less than 15% of Alan Baird's property is dedicated to winter grazing, and he says there can be runoff, but it's the best option for now.
We step away from a good practice to other practices that we would quite quickly find fault with, and particularly now where farmers are under pressure to lower their methane emissions without lowering stock numbers, shifting stock indoors is only going to lift our methane emissions. So it's quite complex.
He says the recent scrutiny on winter grazing will encourage more farmers to check they are using best practice. Last week, Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor announced a new task force will be set up to identify winter grazing issues and potential solutions. Southland Regional Council is organising to meet industry groups and discuss how winter grazing can be improved using a unified approach. For Checkpoint, Tess Brunton, TNA.
It's about 7 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening and wondering what you think of winter grazing. Should it be banned altogether or improved in some way? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A chronic shortage of bus drivers continues to plague the capital's peak hour services. Commuters will now have even fewer buses to catch because the Regional Council has cancelled 25 services due to a lack of drivers. Now that brings the total to nearly 50. Charlotte Cook has this report.
It's a common story for Wellingtonians trying to get to and from work to see the bus shelter sign suddenly change to read cancelled. Or if the bus does show up, it's so jammed full of people it can't stop. This is exactly the case for commuter Abby.
I noticed at peak hour that the buses can be a little bit unreliable, especially around 6 p.m. when you're trying to get home from work. It says the bus will come, and it says it's due, and then it never shows up, and then you're kind of screwed.
Abby says she always has to have a backup plan if she's planning to catch a bus. Wellington's Regional Councillor Darren Ponter says the decision to cut further services will make things more certain for commuters. He says it means fewer last-minute cancellations.
Now we have greater certainty that it's just those 46, that we can reduce any last-minute cancellation. It's embarrassing that, more than a year on, we are still dealing with these types of issues. Embarrassing for the council, but absolutely frustrating for commuters.
One of New Zealand's main transport companies, New Zealand Bus, suspended 21 services in February due to a shortage of 30 drivers, and even resorted to using taxi vans. But the chief executive, Zane Fuljames, says the situation is now looking a bit better.
At New Zealand Bus, we're about 10 to 12 drivers down now. Over the last 6 months across the country, we've interviewed 1,225 people. We've employed 225 drivers, and we are expecting to return to full complement in Wellington over the next 2 months.
Both New Zealand Bus and Transurban say there is a nationwide bus driver shortage. It isn't just limited to Wellington. Transurban runs about 50% of the city's bus services. Its director, Kevin Snellgrove, says they are currently short 40 full-time staff and 14 part-time drivers. He says the 25 services will be suspended for 6 months. In Wellington for Checkpoint, ko Charlotte Cook, TNA.
Women prisoners say they feel discriminated against by employers and that finding a job once they're on the outside is extremely difficult. But they say a careers expo for those soon to be released from prison is giving them hope that they can turn their lives around. Our reporter Jessie Chang and visual journalist Claire Easton-Farrelly have the story.
At first glance, it looks like any other careers expo. Banners are set up and flyers are being handed out. Employers from the construction and heavy vehicle industries to textiles and fabrics are touting their wares. The only difference is that those interested in the jobs on offer are behind bars at the Auckland Region Women's Corrections Facility in Wiri. They say they never thought steady employment was available for them.
Because there's not much opportunities out there for prisoners and ex-prisoners. So a lot of people look at you differently, you get treated differently. But it's good that this is here because it is actually giving us another chance and a whole other opportunity for us to carry on living our lives as normal people.
RNZ cannot identify the woman because of privacy reasons, but every inmate we spoke to talked about feeling like the odds were stacked against them.
It's quite nerve-wracking for us.
Just gets pushed aside, eh?
Yeah, it's like, we get the last pick, we're put at the bottom of the list.
There's a lot of discrimination, I think, where prisoners are concerned, because with my charges, I am judged. I am, we're not first option for a job opportunity, so for me, I have to really seriously consider where I want to go in life, how I'm going to get there, and what is it that I want to do, and who's going to help me achieve all that. So we do come across barriers, but the more you get knocked down, you just got to keep getting back up and keep trying.
The Careers Expo is a part of Corrections' This Way for Work program, which aims to stop prisoners from reoffending and get them into stable jobs. Since it started in November of 2016, more than 2,700 offenders have been employed, and about 68% of them stay in the job for more than 6 months. For the first time, a speed recruiting session is being introduced, where employers can hold quick meet and greets with the prisoners. Carl Bethel from Corrections is in charge of getting prisoners into work. He initially thought it would be hard for employers to get on board.
Natural fact, if you're open and honest and you build that rapport, I've been surprised by how many employers are actually keen to give people a second go.
One of the employers at the Expo, Bridgman Concrete, says it only started hiring ex-convicts in the last 2 years. Its general manager, Tim Walters, says they've hired 10 ex-prisoners in that time and still currently employ 9.
At the end of the day, we see it as that they've actually, paid the debt to society. What's the worst they can do to us? They can't pinch concrete off us, so no. And the first 2 really proved themselves, turning up every day, hard-working, great attitude. So, that really paved it for the rest of the guys to come on board. So, very good.
So it's something that you definitely recommend to other employers?
Yes, absolutely recommend it to anybody who's looking for staff.
And for Carl Bethel, he's looking forward to a day when he's not needed anymore.
Well, I guess it's one of those things, if I do my job really well, I'll make myself unemployed. And wouldn't that be a great thing?
I Tamaki Makaurau o te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Jesse Chang tēnei.
And returning to our story about the report into the census, Donna in Tito has been in contact and she says, didn't they realise that not all people have or use home computers or have easy access to one? She says, I got told to go to the local library, which is over 40 kilometres away. Thanks, Donna, for getting in touch. And we'll have more on that after the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata-awa tēnei. A man armed with a knife has been arrested in central Sydney after a stabbing rampage which led to one woman being taken to hospital. Witnesses described the man being chased by 5 or 6 other men armed with crowbars and an axe. He was eventually restrained by members of the public until armed police arrived. A witness, David Vaux, says it was a chaotic scene.
The man ran down the road towards a cafe where some patrons there must have tripped him up, and they then put a chair on top of him, a milk crate over his head. The other men who were chasing him at this time then restrained him, and I then saw a long knife that he must have dropped.
The police say the man attempted to stab a number of people. Several central Sydney streets have been closed pending the completion of a police operation. Helicopters have been brought in to help rescue 5 people hit by an avalanche on Aoraki Mount Cook this afternoon. The avalanche was reported about 3:20. Inspector Gavin McGaskin says one person has moderate injuries believed to be a dislocated shoulder and others have minor injuries. He says they'll be airlifted off the slopes to the Mount Cook village. He says the group of skiers set off a locator beacon which alerted emergency services in Wellington. The Avalanche Advisory Service says there is considerable risk of avalanche on the upper slopes of the mountain, and a local guide says strong wind over the weekend along with fresh snow has heightened the risk. The commissioners leading the inquiry into the Christchurch mosque attacks have visited Norway and the United Kingdom to meet with experts on national security, extremism and terrorism. They're investigating what could or should have been done to prevent the shootings on March the 15th. Katie Scotcher reports.
During the trip, the commissioners met with people both inside and outside government, including some Norwegian officials involved in the response to the terror attacks that killed 77 people and injured hundreds more in 2011. Commissioner Jackie Kane says the trip has allowed them to get insight into the lessons already learned by other countries that have experienced significant terror attacks. It's likely the commissioners will travel overseas again to continue meeting with experts. Ko Katie Scotcher aho.
The ongoing protests at Hong Kong Airport have forced Air New Zealand to cancel 2 of its flights. It says its flight from Auckland to Hong Kong, due to leave last night, was initially delayed until this morning, but has now been cancelled. That means today's flight from Hong Kong to Auckland is also cancelled. Air New Zealand says passengers will be accommodated on other services where possible. It's closely monitoring the situation at Hong Kong Airport, and this evening's flight from Auckland is still scheduled to depart. A Cathay Pacific flight to Hong Kong left Auckland earlier this afternoon. Calls for the next census to be brought forward have not been backed by an independent review of the botched 2018 census. The review's findings have already prompted the resignation of Stats NZ's Chief Executive, Liz McPherson. The report found problems with delays, communication and the IT delivery service. The first official results of the census will be released on September the 23rd, 11 months later than planned. The report recommends against holding another census in early 2021, saying it would be unsafe with too little time to properly redesign, test and implement a new plan. Auckland homeowners will be able to get loans for solar panels, LED lighting and electric vehicle charges, which they will be able to pay back through their rates. The council has voted to extend its Retrofit Your Home scheme, which is aimed at improving poorly insulated or cold homes. Under the scheme, owners can borrow up to $5,000 to help pay for council-approved measures such as insulation. They can then repay the loan through their rates over 9 years. The council has now voted to add 8 new measures to the scheme, but will remove financing for fuelled gas because it emits too much carbon. Residents of a Wellington suburb say putting a liquor store in their village will ruin it. About 50 people have been at a public hearing today opposing a bottle store proposed for Kandala village. One of them, Lorraine Pels, says the community doesn't want any sort of bottle shop in the area, but she says it's not a case of NIMBYism.
Every neighbourhood has the right to look at what facilities are available and whether they are actually suitable, and certainly many neighbourhoods have indicated that they do not want a bottle store.
Lorraine Powell says there have always been problems with young people drinking in the park nearby, and the community doesn't want that problem to get worse. However, the lawyer for the applicant, John Young, told the hearing there's never been disorderly behaviour around the stores his client owns or at stores in nearby suburbs.
There is no evidence, for example, of anyone drinking alcohol outside Glengarry and Kelburn and starting fights or smashing bottles. It just doesn't appear to happen, particularly in affluent and stable communities such as Kandala.
Lawyer John Young. The police have finished a reenactment at the scene of a fatal hit and run in Christchurch. Homeless man Dean Amies was killed after being hit by a white van fleeing the police in New Brighton last Wednesday. Officers were seen reenacting the van's route along Hawke Street and Shaw Avenue this afternoon. The police are still looking for 21-year-old Liam Strickland, who was wanted in connection with the hit and run. It's coming up to 6 minutes past 6. The All Blacks deny they deliberately targeted Wallaby loose forward Michael Hooper in their surprise loss to Australia at the weekend. Lock Scott Barrett was sent off for a dangerous tackle on Hooper and has since been suspended for one test. The former Australia international Rod Kafer says the All Blacks intentionally targeted Hooper in order to unsettle the home side, pointing out that minutes before Barrett's sending off, Adi Savea shoved Hooper's head into the ground. But All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster says Kafer's accusation simply isn't true.
Rod's a very smart man. I'm a little bit surprised he said it. People can say whatever they like and it doesn't change the truth is that we didn't, and I'm sure Rod will sit down one night and have a cup of tea and think of that maybe it wasn't quite the truth after all.
Meanwhile, Rugby Australia and former Wallaby Israel Folau have been urged to reach an out-of-court settlement over the termination of his 4-year contract in May. At a court hearing in Melbourne today, a judge encouraged the parties to settle their dispute at a mediation hearing in December. But if that fails, the matter will go to trial in early February. And American Simone Biles has become the first woman in almost 70 years to win a 6th all-round title at the US Gymnastics Championships. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Motoko Kakubayashi reports in from Japan, although she also took time out to experience a typhoon in Taiwan. So much for that summer holiday. There's a window on the world of Bob Marley's masterpiece, Redemption Song. And this week's after-dinner speaker, our economist Brian Easton, dissects the Reserve Bank's record cut to interest rates. How much lower can we go? On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland through to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Occasional showers, some heavy with possible squally thunderstorms in the west this evening. Showers clearing Bay of Plenty later tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Manawatu through to Wellington, fine tonight. Cloudy periods with a few showers tomorrow. Clearing in the south tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough and Nelson, fine apart from isolated showers tomorrow afternoon and evening. Bulla and Westland, occasional showers clearing from the south tomorrow. Canterbury, mostly fine, cloud developing this evening with showers about Banks Peninsula, becoming fine later tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods and a few showers. Snow flurries possible to 200 metres tonight and tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain tonight and in the morning. Southwesterlies rising to gale tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:08.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint on RNZ National and I'm Lisa Owen. The Maori Council is calling for a rerun of the botched 2018 census. It comes after the government's top statistician resigned today following the release of a damning report into the problem-plagued census. The overall response rate was 4% lower than the previous census, but the rate for Māori dived 20 percentage points to 68%. While some data has has been salvaged, Stats NZ concedes there's still significant gaps in figures for Māori. New Zealand Maori Council Executive Director Matthew Tukake has consistently raised concerns about the census process, and he joins me now. Kia ora, good evening.
Kia ora.
Māori statistics have been recognised as a major blind spot in this census, but the chief statistician has apologised. The report has made a bunch of recommendations. She's resigned. So is that it? Can we move forward from here?
No, I don't think we can. I mean, it's good that Liz has done what no other public servant in recent memory has done, and that is, thrown herself out the door for what has been an absolute debacle. But, as Māori Council, as a Māori, I grow tired of the endless apologies when these sorts of organisations consistently get it wrong when it comes to our people and us. I mean, I argue the point that this data is fundamentally important when it comes to the provisioning and the funding of core government services, from health and housing to education, transport, infrastructure, all of these different things. And one of the massive blind spots that's so obvious in the Māori data that didn't come through is the fact that the number of our people who weren't responding or engaged in the regions and the provinces and coastal communities would lead people to think that our people on the coast are extinct just like the moa bird is. And so there's nothing to see here. If there's nothing to see here and nobody's living here, there's nothing to fund here. And all of a sudden it gives agencies and government departments carte blanche to pull back. But that figure of 88.5% was what the Māori response rate was in 2013, down to 68.2%, which is nearly a 20% drop. It begs the question, well, where are they getting the data from to fill that gap? And here's the thing. The data that they're collecting from government departments, agencies and ministries is pretty average at best. We know that they don't have consistent systems of data collection. We know that the codification of data within these agencies is pretty light on the ground. And so trying to make sense of all of that to fill that 20% gap is quite horrendous.
So Matthew, sorry to interrupt, is Stats New Zealand and the Minister misleading us then when they say that the core baseline statistics that they will use to decide electoral boundaries, population and DHB funding, they're saying it's better than it usually would be because they are supplementing it with this other data. Well, are they misleading us, are you saying?
Absolutely they're misleading us. I would love to know how they've constructed those data sets to fill a 20% in Māori data. Now, they have gone out and they have sought partnerships with iwi and hapu, although I did note that they tried to seek a partnership through data collection around the iwi Cheers Forum. Well, the iwi Cheers Forum is not even an established legal entity. And also, when you have a look at the databases and data collection of Māori organisations and service providers up and down Dale, there has never been adequate investment in those organisations where they have the administrative infrastructure to actually pull together these data sets that are so badly needed. So yes, absolutely, it is an absolute nonsense to think that 20% of a data gap can somehow be magicked up overnight. And indeed, I'm sitting down with Liz on Friday, the Chief Government Statistician and the General Manager of Māori, to talk about exactly where we need to go next when it comes to this absolute debacle. Because at the end of the day, it's Māori people that will suffer as a result.
One of the areas where they concede there are still significant gaps is information around iwi affiliations. In practical terms, what could that mean? How could it disadvantage Māori? Yeah,
in practical terms, it could mean that we often hear about the bigger iwi and hapu out there. So, Ngāi Tahu, Tai Nui, Ngāti Porou, etc. They've got significant infrastructure sitting beside them and behind them. But then you've got a number of iwi and hapu organisations out there who are very small, who don't have huge amounts of infrastructure behind them, and so their data collection and methods of data collection and also data partnerships are pretty light on the ground. So you've got that problem. But the second and biggest problem, actually, is very much about whether or not Māori know what their tribal and iwi affiliations actually are. And we see this through the Oranga Tamariki process. We see it through the process around Paul Eagle calling for reform to adoption legislation files and records. So about 40,000 Māori are estimated to have been adopted out over the last few decades of the period he's looking at, and very few of those people also know what their iwi and tribal and hapu affiliations actually are. So this has been a long rolling train wreck from the very beginning. The other thing that hasn't been taken into account with the census is also the net migration in and outflow of Māori as a very transient population group between New Zealand and Australia. And so it could very well be that in a single year, on a single night, the Māori population for a particular iwi or hapu might be X, Y and Z. But within a matter of 24 hours, that number could almost double, depending on whether or not people register, say, for a settlements trust dividend.
At the moment, you were calling for a rerun of this census, but that flies in the face of the recommendations of the report. The report says, let's not do a rerun, let's wait until 2023, otherwise it could be unsafe. In short, you could get another botched census. So why push it ahead? Why push for it to come early?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is it. I mean, 2023 is a long time between now and drinks, let's face it. So we've got a fair few years. Now, that is on the hope and a prayer that the department itself, the agency itself, will sort the problem out that occurred the last time. There's no guarantee of that, because there could always be another shortfall in funding. There could always be a 5% cost saving across each government department that was instituted a few years ago, and so on and so forth. So there's a low degree of trust on whether or not they could adequately hold it in 2023. But one of the other things that has always concerned me is we've had the problem with the electoral data, we've had the problem now with this census data, and I'm telling you, we're getting to the point now where the New Zealand Maori Council will put on the table and say to the Crown, say to the government, well, actually, it's time for a Māori census and population data check. Now, if that means that we take control both over the data sovereignty question and also about formulating New Zealand population data sets along Māori census lines, then maybe that's where we need to fall in this case.
So, just to be clear, would you be asking for funding to conduct a Māori census yourself or through Māori organisations?
Absolutely, and if we do not get that now, then when it comes to 2023, then there needs to be a hell of a lot more work done to build trust and faith with Māori, iwi, hapu, Māori, pan-Māori organisation and so on for the census, the forthcoming census to be successful. But here's the thing, Māori have a right to be in charge of our own destiny. We have a right under the treaty to be responsible for our own affairs, and that weighs now down on the census data. Now, it's not just the census data where we're falling behind the eight ball. We're falling behind the eight ball when it comes to the suicide numbers, when it comes to housing and housing affordability, access to the high wage growth side of the economy, all of these different things. And every time that we attempt to move ourselves forward, we're pushed back by people in government who say, well, this is the way we've always done it. Well, the way that they've always done it, and this is clear with the census, hasn't been working. So, I hate to say it, but it's time maybe some of these people got off the bus and gave us the keys so we could drive it forward ourselves.
Really appreciate you joining us this evening. That is Matthew Tukaki, who is the New Zealand Maori Council's Chief Executive Director, who's saying there that potentially Māori should conduct their own census. A maritime police officer has described a titanic battle as he stopped a 200-tonne ferry from slamming into an Auckland wharf with a tow line strung from a 12-metre inflatable boat. The Great Barrier Island car ferry was thrown off its mooring in Wynyard Quarter last night during a squall, which onlookers have described as a tornado. A police coastal master, John Burridge, says he was helping people injured by flying furniture at a restaurant when he looked up to see the looming ferry barrelling across the harbour after its mooring gave way. He says it was about 50 metres from Captain Cook Wharf.
And so we went straight to the scene with our lights and siren, and while we were there assisting people on the wharf, I looked up and saw sea bridge, the large vehicle ferry going down the harbour. And obviously it had no lights on and there was no one on board. So I thought, okay, it's broken its berthing lines. And then we went out and were able to get alongside the ferry, and we managed to get a tow line onto one of the, what we call a bollard, like a strong deck fitting. And we're able to then stop the ferry going onto the rocks. So it was about to hit Captain Cook Wharf and go onto the rocks by there. So we're able to stop doing that, and we pulled it back into the middle of the harbour. And during that time, we contacted Harbour Control and got them to call one of the tugs out. But again, the tug crew was at home, so they had to come in and man one of the tugs. And then, so that took a little bit of time. But during that time, we were able to keep the ferry in the middle of the harbour away from any danger. And we also contacted the Sea-Link crew who came in from home. And but also during that time, I don't know if you're aware, there was a 60-foot sailing catamaran in West Haven that was flipped by the tornado as well. So we were concerned about people being injured with a catamaran. So we also sent that one staff member that was still ashore with a police four-wheel drive. We sent him around to West Haven to assess that at the same time. So it was all go at one stage there. And obviously lots of debris in the harbour. We had shipping containers blown off wharves into the water. But we were able to actually get one of the tugs out, and one of the tugs came alongside the ferry, and we were able to secure it and then take it back into safety at Wynyard Wharf.
That's Police Coastal Master John Burridge. It is 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Russia has buried 5 nuclear scientists who were killed in an explosion last week, which some fear may have actually been a nuclear weapons accident. It's acknowledged there was an accident during a rocket test on a sea platform in the country's north. Last year, Russia announced it had tested a cruise missile powered by a nuclear reactor. As CNN's Fred Pleitgen reports, a spike in radiation levels recorded in a nearby city has sparked suspicions that the nuclear missile may have exploded during a test.
Confusion and concern about a mysterious explosion and a missile test gone wrong that some now fear could be the worst Russian nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. Moscow acknowledges a blast took place at a naval range last week, but won't say whether it was nuclear. Instead, they're saying liquid fuel caught fire during trials in the Arctic North, leading to the blast. Local authorities initially said they recorded a short-term spike in radiation levels, but their statement was later deleted. And the Defense Ministry claims no dangerous substances were released after the explosion. But tonight, experts tell CNN satellite images appear to show that the Russians have sent a special nuclear fuel carrier ship to the area.
That ship is used to carry nuclear fuel, and Russia in the past has used that ship to transport the radioactive reactor unit from the nuclear-powered cruise missile.
Russia's state-run nuclear agency did admit that 5 of its employees were killed in the blast.
A chain of tragic accidents happened, although our preliminary analysis indicates they were fighting to get the situation under control. Unfortunately, that failed.
Last year, Vladimir Putin revealed Russia is testing nuclear-powered cruise missiles to counter NATO's missile defense systems.
Now that the missile launch and ground tests were successful, we can begin developing a completely new type of weapon, a strategic nuclear weapons system with a nuclear-powered missile.
If this was nuclear, it would not be the first time Moscow muddled its messaging after a potential nuclear mishap. In 1986, the Soviet Union didn't acknowledge the Chernobyl disaster until Western nations detected heightened radiation levels in Europe.
You will need to move quickly and you will need to move carefully.
Thousands of people died in the aftermath of that meltdown, which is now the subject of the HBO series Chernobyl. And in 2000, Moscow kept its own public in the dark about the sinking of the Kursk nuclear submarine, killing all 118 sailors on board, leading to harsh criticism of then new Russian President Vladimir Putin. More questions than answers remain, as Vladimir Putin's office still has not commented at all on the explosion, leaving Russians and the world guessing how dangerous the aftermath might be.
Fred Pleitgen in Moscow there. Moriori leaders say they hope a settlement with the Crown will lay old ghosts to rest by putting their true history and suffering into law. The Moriori people of Rekohu, or the Chatham Islands, have initialled their deed of settlement after 3 years of negotiations. Mani Dunlop was there.
Waiata Tautoko, Moriori descendants sang of the waka rangimata that brought their karapuna or ancestors to Rekohu. Chief negotiator Maui Hurumona describes it as a historic day for his iwi, but especially for the mokopu or next generation. He says he hopes this settlement will get rid of the stigma many Moriori face.
I was told by my social studies teacher when I was about 13 that there's no such thing as Moriori, that you're a myth. And I said, well, sir, my grandfather's Tommy Solomon, he was full-blooded Moriori, no such thing. And, that's a very common story for a lot of our people, from the eldest to the youngest. And there are still many who kind of believe that myth. But I think this settlement will help put the record straight because it'll be part of legislation, be part of our law.
The initialing of the deed of settlement comes after years of injustices the Moriori have faced. In 1862, 33 Moriori signed a 131-page petition to Governor George Grey asking for their land rights and to be released from slavery. They lived on the island for 800 years and had a population of 2,500 people. By 1862, that had plummeted to 120 due to colonisation and Ngāti Tama and Ngāti Mutunga who invaded the islands. Maui Hurumona says the settlement, which includes the return of cultural sites on the island, as well as $18 million, will be hugely beneficial to Rekohu.
So it just gives us an impetus for the future because most of our people live off Rekohu. 90% of our members live off the island through no fault of their own because there was a diaspora. And so we're reconnecting them back to Rekohu. So we've got to think of our people who are up here in Aotearoa and elsewhere around the world. But it's going to be significant for Rekohu.
Mr Hurumona's son, Tamaro Ariki, says he has been brought up to be honoured to carry Moriori whakapapa.
It's an extremely proud moment to be a Moriori, being here and kind of being able to actually sign the ARP almost on behalf of the younger generation of Moriori was really special.
He now has his sights set on revitalising the language of his ancestors.
There is an opportunity for someone to kind of be the champion, so to speak, of revitalising the re, and so that could be an avenue I might pursue later in the future. I think it'd be really cool.
Last week, the High Court threw out an injunction by Ngāti Mutunga o Wharikauri to stop the initialing of the settlement, arguing they are mana whenua, despite invading the island. Minister for Treaty of Waitangi Negotiations, Andrew Little, says he will continue to work on the Crown's relationship with Ngāti Mutunga. However, he says today's milestone is the beginning of a new relationship with Moriori.
What happened to Moriori historically is probably one of the most challenging things to happen to any Māori population in New Zealand, so I think this has been a very long journey to recognise what happened to them and for the Crown to recognise its failings, its failure to protect, which it was required to do under the treaty, and to come to terms with that and provide some redress.
The deed of settlement will be taken back to iwi or iwi members to be ratified and is expected to be passed into law early next year. For Checkpoint, ko Mani Dunlop tēnei.
A bottle store is not in keeping with the village. That's the message from residents of an upmarket Wellington suburb who oppose a liquor store being opened in their leafy neighbourhood. 50 Kandala residents showed up to a hearing in the city today in one of the biggest outcries against a proposed liquor licence seen in the capital. Laura Dooney was at the hearing.
The hearing for the Bottle-O branded store had to be moved to a bigger room in the Michael Fowler Centre because of the large number of people expected to come along to have their say. Lorraine Powles was one of about 50 who attended. She says the community doesn't want any sort of bottle shop on Kandala's Ganges Road, but denied it was a case of NIMBYism.
Every neighbourhood has the right to look at what facilities are available and whether they are actually suitable, and certainly many neighbourhoods have indicated that they do not want a bottle store.
Lorraine Powles says there have always been problems with people drinking in a park near the proposed site of the bottle shop.
That pocket park has been an ongoing issue with kids drinking or smoking or gathering. It's not new, but we actually do not want to see that potentially increase.
Wellington's Mayor Justin Lester is also opposed to the bottle store. So much so that he stepped down from the charitable trust that has leased the property to the liquor store chain. He says this is consistent with his opposition to other bottle stores in the city.
I live close to the Kandala community and I had an interest and I had already voiced my opposition in the community because of the role that I had on the charitable trust. I'd make that known. So I've made sure that my personal voice and voice as mayor is being heard.
John Young, the lawyer for the applicant, says it's alleged the bottle shop will bring nuisance, crime or disorder to the village. But that's never happened around any of the stores owned by the applicant, Kartik Bariani.
Or, to his knowledge, in or around any stores in comparable areas. There is no evidence, for example, of anyone drinking alcohol outside Glengarry and Kelburn and starting fights or smashing bottles. It just doesn't appear to happen.
Mr Young says often such applications are rejected in areas that are deprived or vulnerable, but Kandala is neither. But Alistair Hutchins, who spoke on behalf of the suburb's residents, says young people will be attracted to the proposed bottle-o at night and on the weekends.
Even if Mr Badiani changes the proposed branding of the store or reduces the hours of operation, the key point is still missed. A bottle store is not in keeping with the village. An off-licence liquor retailer is simply not compatible with the village.
There is no opposition to the bottle store from police or from the local medical officer of health. The hearing will continue tomorrow. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, ko Laura Dooney aho.
And that's all we've got time for this evening. Thanks for joining us. We will be back again, same place, same time tomorrow.
NZ News at 6:30. Sydney police investigating a man armed with a knife accused of stabbing and injuring a woman this afternoon have found the body of another woman in a building. 5 people have been rescued after an avalanche hit a skiing party on Mount Cook in the Southern Alps. Their guide has a dislocated shoulder.